Hello and welcome to another episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of law firm Alchemy, and we have a returning guest to the show, someone who I've known for a while now, who last time I had him on, we uncovered a ton of different marketing tactics, concepts, ideas, etc., that you can use in your law firm. He's a prolific marketer who's been building his marketing stack over time. You've already seen the name in the description, but it's always more fun to do the build up. So I'm happy to have back my friend and estate planning attorney, Andrew Ayers. Andrew, great to have you back, man.
You always say such nice things, Charlie. I want to look behind me to make sure you're not talking about somebody else. But thank you. It's great to be back for another episode.
I'm excited to talk with you. Okay, so you have the difficult task. You're now going to be only the second person who has ever had to do this, which is have a new answer for the question, what is the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
Well, I think, and it's kind of a challenging one because it's not what law school is built for, but I think law school doesn't teach you that at some point you can pretty much disregard everything they taught you and go back to being yourself. So law school is designed to build a certain type of law student, the type of student who's going to get that number one in the class, become a judge, become a professor, become a worker at a big law firm. But ultimately, you get to choose in the end who you want to be. And in my experience, the people who are authentic to that, some of the most successful lawyers I know are the ones who are not your typical lawyer, but they're amazing. They have amazing skills, but they're true to themselves. And they just have this bigger than life personality. And you have a meeting with them or their clients meet with them. And you can immediately feel that this is what they want to do. This is their life. This is their calling. And that passion comes through. And I guarantee you none of that came from their law school.
Okay, so that is a fascinating issue. And I love where you've taken it, Andrew, with the idea that there are some people who still manage to hold on to their sense of self better than others. So why do you think some people can go through the gauntlet of law school, which I agree has a sanding off the edges approach to generating individuals who can practice law at the end of the day? Why do some go through and maintain their edges? And how does that advantage translate into the real world?
I think some people are just really safe in who they are. I knew a guy in law school who was really a surfer, and that's what he loved to do. And sure enough, when he was done with law school, he went back down to where he was from and he would surf all day and do some law practice. But, he was never going to give up that piece of himself. And his clients knew that. And, he wasn't doing litigation. He was doing transactional work, but he had such a strong network from the surfing community that it was easy for him to translate initially into getting new clients because surfers had legal needs too. And at the flip side, I worked for a guy for a while when we were doing family law who was not comfortable being in the room with very affluent, soon-to-be divorcees. And they could pick up on it. So we would have, for example, a wife would come from the Upper East Side of Manhattan. They would come from a lot of money. There's a lot of zeros on that net worth sheet that's coming out through the meeting. And there was something off with the meeting. And you could tell that she was speaking a different language than the lawyer was. And he would always get so concerned after the fact that they didn't hire him. And he would kind of joke with the receptionist afterwards about, oh, she's probably too good for us and she makes too much money. But it's because neither of them spoke that language. They're not country club people. They don't have that connection. And I'm sure that the attorney that particular woman hired probably has that ability to understand the language. They're not going to mock her for the type of handbag she has. I believe one of the women had like a business card that said, I'm so-and-so's mom. And, I remember sitting after the consultation and he looked at the cards and this is ridiculous. Why would someone have a card that says I'm so-and-so's mom? And it was like, well, because she goes to the playground with the other mothers who their kids play with. And that's the way they're able to connect. This was in the early 2000s. There wasn't a lot of social media. And so there was that missed connection. But then I think back to the people who do it right. I have a guy I worked for back in the early 2000s. I still try to send cases to when I can, because, if my business is on the line and it's a $10 million lawsuit, I'm calling him up immediately because that's what he loves to do. And that's what he's amazing at. And his personality, I've seen him in front of a jury, and you expect the jury to say, hey, where are we going for dinner afterwards? Like, I love this guy. Where, are we all going out? What are we doing next? So that comes across to your clients.
That is spectacular. Now it invites this idea of code switching, right? That which is the ability to, when you hear someone else's accent or verbal tics, you are able to modify yourself to meet them where they're at based on a pre-built persona that you have. So it's a little bit different than sort of your standard sales mirroring. It's really adopting a different personality. That idea of being able to meet the affluent divorcee where she is while still maintaining a sense of yourself seems like a potentially complex equation. How can that be handled better as a law firm owner or a lawyer who's positioned in a sales space?
I mean, I think part of it, and it's a rough thing to say, is if that's not who you are, don't go after the client, because that
I love
mismatch
that.
is going to come across. And if you can bridge that gap, that's great. I meet with people all the time, and the end of the meeting is, I'm not the right person for you, but I probably know 2 or 3 people who are. Because if that bridge is too far, you're not going to make it across. I mean, you're just not going to make it. So, and when you try too hard, at some point they're going to figure out. I mean, you can try to cross that bridge, but at some point the other person's going to probably get the feeling that, wait a second, something's a little bit off in this conversation.
Now, if you were to have, say, like a young lawyer, let's say you hired, let's say, 3 young lawyers at the same time in your firm, and we're going to try and get them to, at the same time, bring themselves forward while also better understanding your clients. How would you go about doing what law school didn't do for them in that regard?
I think you would start in that case with understanding their story. Where did they grow up? What are they good at? What do they like to do? What are their interests? So you can see what those connections would be. Because if you're bringing in 3 young attorneys and you're in a market where they're not going to have any ability to relate to any of it, you can train, and they absolutely should learn and train, and they should get involved in different activities, different clubs, because that will help them start to bridge that gap. So if they get involved with like an inn of court, or they get involved with the bar association, they will then start to meet some of those people in the market and get a feel for whether it's going to fit for them and whether or not it's really something they're comfortable doing and people they're comfortable speaking with. So I think the key would be, and whether it's a client, whether it's an employee, whether it's a guy on the other side of this screen, you want to find out their story. You want to find out what they're interested in, where they came from, what gets them out of bed in the morning. You'd be amazed what gets some people out of bed in the morning. It's not always a crying baby.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I'm past that phase. So what was your sense of self like coming out of law school?
My sense of self was actually pretty strong based on the places I worked during law school. So I worked at smaller firms. So I think the first thing I knew was going to work at a large firm was just not going to be for me. It was not my personality. It was not, I didn't have top of the class grades. I was on Law Journal. I was on Moot Court. I was good at practical applications of what I was learning, but I wasn't an A+ student, and I knew that working as an associate in a big firm was not going to be for me. I wanted a smaller atmosphere with more personal relationships and more personal connections. And I worked in a family law firm for a little while, and dude, it was there for a while. It was clearly not the right fit for me long term. And then now that I'm on my own, I've really tried to be cognizant of picking where I spend my time. So when I first started out, I was in a co-working space in Brooklyn, and I was surrounded by a lot of new businesses. There was a few attorneys, but most people were not business owners. There was writers, there was graphic designers. It was an invigorating space to be in. And that was, I talked last time about those holiday parties, and used to love going to the holiday party and hearing what people are working on and what's the new tech coming up. And, getting into those people's stories and what's going on with them helped me get over kind of where I started and where I wanted to be. And I think you have to do a little trial and error. I don't think any lawyer has to stick with the firm that they start with right out of law school. I certainly didn't. But I think there can be pressure on that if you go right into a large corporate setting of some type, that, you're immediately, just like in law school, you're now on this track and the train is on the tracks. It's going straight. It's really hard to hit that emergency brake and say, I'm going to go see what's over in the field over here. Maybe there's something interesting over there. But if you can do it, I think and I think a lot of people were given that opportunity a few years ago when those young attorneys were given furlough essentially for a year. And they said, your job will be here in a year. when you want to come back. And I think a lot of them had the chance to go explore the other areas of law that maybe they hadn't thought of because they were on that straight track to the big firm.
That actually represents potentially a significant disruptive force in the law overall, and an invitation to bring more sense of self into the legal profession writ large. If that wave were to be significant enough and to crash, what effect do you think it really brings with it on the legal profession over the next, say, decade in a best case scenario?
Yeah, I think in a best case scenario, we get more personalized legal services with less need to overbill the clients. I think the hourly model continues, and if you're in a firm that has hourly billing requirements, then that's one thing you have to be cognizant of. I remember halfway through my time in family law, one year it was, okay, now we're actually going to start tracking time, and I never understood why. Maybe it was financial, but prior to that, we just did the work and we got it done. And then one year it was, okay, turn in your hours at the end of every month. And what I found interesting was I would turn in hours, and then the report I would get back would be different than what I had turned in. And so I actually started keeping a little journal on the side of my desk so I knew what my hours were, so that when the time came to analyze my hours, I could say, wait a second, that's not what I billed that month. You might be writing off the hours or something might have happened to them, but I did that work.
Right.
And that was unfortunately tied to my value at that point. But I think if we get away from that and have more small firms, you can have people really diving into what they are passionate about and can really find, and there's enough attorneys out there and there's enough legal work out there. I mean, if you look at any legal market, they want you to think that there's a lot of competition and that there's 5 or 6 different estate planning attorneys in the building I'm sitting in right now. So technically we're all competing for the same clients, but at the same point, everyone needs an estate plan and there's a lot of demand for it. There's plenty of people getting arrested. There's plenty of people getting divorced. So the clients are out there. And I think that change would allow more people to really dive into what they're passionate about. And that will make a big difference in, I think, the quality of the legal work. Because, I've been in court with like young associates who clearly don't want to be there. They've been told by a partner to show up. I had a case years ago with a large law firm, and I was friendly with the partner who was very frank with me and said, I'm sending my associate because they need some experience. And that was the end of it. He said, we'll get the case settled. You'll get the money you're looking for, but I've got to bill the client a bit and my associate needs experience. And the associate was really hard to deal with, but it's because they weren't interested in the case. There was nothing. I mean, it would have been interesting. It was a celebrity involved, but the celebrity wasn't in the courtroom. There was nothing going on. It was just, discovery conferences, and it wasn't exciting. And you could tell on the associate's face the second they stepped in the courtroom that, I got to be here on a Tuesday morning at 9:30.
That is too bad, and that does seem to be kind of an issue overall in the selling of careers. Is a lot of times it feels like what people are buying as their career, they are only buying the version that is 3 decades into the career, not 3 months into the career, and they have to face that reality. Now, all of a sudden, I find what you talked about there really fascinating, Andrew, because the idea of a lot of small firms growing and the quality of legal services being a little bit more intimate, that is an interesting wave to potentially crash at the same time that we're waiting to see the crash of venture capital, private equity, non-lawyer investment in law firms invade the legal space, which seemed like it had picked up speed, but feels like it slowed down a little bit now. There's still a lot of questions to be answered. Those two forces would seem to be somewhat in conflict with each other, that idea of mass market legal services versus boutique practices. I'm really curious, obviously with your own firm, as you look ahead toward what happens if private equity comes into the market, what are your thoughts surrounding that?
I mean, I think that there's space in the market for both. I mean, there's always going to be work for a law firm that's 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people large. There's transactions that I would never want to work on because I don't have the time. I want to be able to go home and see my family at the end of the day. So there's going to be, if that comes in the market, the way everyone thinks, well, I don't think it's going to take away much from the small and boutique law firms because they're actually going to benefit more because people are going to want to focus with those lawyers who are doing just what they want to be doing. And the large firms definitely still have their place in this world. And then the smaller firms do. And the medium-sized do as well. And I think that's got to be the challenge for some of those medium-sized firms is how do you keep that boutique feel without turning into the big private equity-backed law firm. But at the same point, some of the older partners want that private equity backing because then they can retire earlier, they get bought out, or they get their money sooner. So there's a lot of, there was a conflict out here in Minneapolis when a lot of the downtown office space shut down. And some of the larger firms, when they were deciding to open back up, the question was who has to go into the office every day. And the old time partners, I shouldn't say old time, but the partners who've been there for a long time, they had their big, nice corner offices. They wanted to go back. They didn't want to be home anymore. Right. But the younger partners who were, my age and a little bit younger were saying, listen, we can streamline this firm. We don't need to pay all this extra money for this huge office space. There's a way to streamline this and actually make all of us more money. And there's that inherent tension about which way do we go? Do we follow the folks who have the corner office, or do we follow the younger partners who are going to be the ones who have to deal with this for the next 25 or 30 years?
Man, it is wild to think between AI, private capital, the floodgate that was open because of COVID, how much has shifted. And I hate the term seismic, but it's worth using at times. These seismic shifts that continue to rupture the existing landscape of law. If you were to get your crystal ball, I really want to just use the term Palantir from Lord of the Rings, right? If you had your Palantir, which technically is only seen into most of the time into the present and other locations, if we're really getting our Lord of the Rings stuff right here. But if you were to be able to see in your crystal ball a decade down the future, you've got AI, you've got culture shift, you've got post-COVID, you have potential private equity. How do you see that landscape really shifting? You've already alluded to 1,000-person firms, the boutique firms. Like, something's got to give in the profession, potentially. What would give in the profession?
I think at some point the education piece is going to have to give, and we're going to have to modify what the students are taught in law school. Because going back to the whole point of this law school of your podcast is, they're not, I went to law school 25 years ago. So, we didn't have AI problems back then, but I remember we were just learning how to use Westlaw.
You had 99 problems, but AI wasn't one.
That's true. And it was 99 when I went there. But, we learned our first year, we had to learn how to do research on books because we weren't fully allowed access to Lexis and Westlaw online yet. And so that has now developed a whole different skill set, and AI is going to take that to, another level. And I'm sure there'll be a different way they learn. At the same time, the judiciary is kind of not happy about the way AI likes to make up cases, and people just, throw the cases into a federal court brief and
that was insane.
Think that nobody's going to notice. So there's going to have to be some guardrails when it comes to how AI can be used and what's the best way to use it. And I think it's in all of our products anyway. I mean, whether you like it or not, it's probably in your favorite software. Clio probably uses it on some level. All these different softwares use AI, whether you like it. And it's a matter of how do you train it to follow the norms of what we're taught in law school. And, the challenge on the education piece is, I saw this on social media the other day, that law is one of the only industries that looks back to a case from 250 years ago and goes, yeah, it's still a good idea today, because everyone else says that's from 2001. That's too old. We're not doing that anymore. I mean, what technology do you use from 2002 that you're like, yeah, this is still cutting edge? So I think that whether it breaks out on the professional side after they graduate or in law schools, we have to somehow bridge that gap of law traditionally says, no, you can't innovate. No, you can't do it. No, you can't use the cloud yet. No, you can't use AI yet, because it takes a long time before law says, okay, we're okay with the AI. We're okay with this part of the practice. And I don't think that it's going to be able to stay that way for long, because the AI is going to be too prevalent. I mean, again, when I started out, lawyers still mainly used WordPerfect. And I would use my personal version of Microsoft Word, and I would send the documents to my clients in Word. And my boss would say, well, we use WordPerfect here. I said, but our clients don't have WordPerfect. Nobody has WordPerfect if they don't work in a law firm. So we need to understand that if your clients have Word, you've got to use Word. If your clients are using an AI program, you have to understand it and be able to converse with them in that.
Yeah. Okay. So that actually takes us in an interesting direction that just popped into my mind, which is, obviously you live in the space of contracts, right? Between
Mhm.
businesses, estate planning, contracts are important. Uh, AI certainly seems to be looking at the contract space and is one of the earliest cases of where AI is being adopted is contract generation. How are you meeting that moment or utilizing AI to enhance the work that you do within the firm?
Well, I think I start with what Perry Marshall says about AI, and that is that AI is going to get you 90% of the way there. And the
Mm,
human being still has to get that last 10%. And whether it's for a contract or any other kind of legal document, you can use it as a template. It can give you the basic language. But at the end of the day, you need that last 10%, that human, to make sure it's right. So even without the AI concept, I've consulted with a lot of businesses over the years where they use an
yeah.
online website to create a business, and it does the filing with the state for you, no problem. It does your articles of organization, a little bit of markup, by the way. If you go to your state's website, you can put in the same information and not pay the markup, and it usually generates it for you as the articles of organization.
Nice.
But where we get to the problem is the operating agreement for that LLC, and they'll give
Hmm.
you a form. And they've mail merged your information from what you gave them to set up the company, but you're never going to be sure if you have the right provisions in the contract. And I've recently been thinking about this like parachuting out of a plane. So if we're using AI or whether we're using a form tool, they'll take you up in the plane. They're going to hand you a parachute and they're going to open the door and then they're going to push you out. So you've now got to figure out how to get that parachute onto your body, strapped in, and open it up. You might survive. You might not survive. Hopefully, you can get that figured out while you're falling to the earth at the speed of gravity. Or if you work with an attorney, what we can do for you first is we'll put the parachute on you. We will buckle it in and say, by the way, pull this little cord. And then when you jump out of the plane, you feel a lot more secure. And so when I look, whether it's
Mm.
AI, whether it's a form tool, you still need that human being to make sure we've got you strapped in tight to your parachute and you know where the pull switch is. Otherwise, you're
Mm.
trying to figure it out in the air when you're hurtling towards the earth.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are a lot of like smaller businesses that are turning to AI for business contracts. And by the
Mhm.
way, I know law firm owners who are utilizing it for small contract pieces. Usually not contracts that for clients, like not the estate planning work, but they're using it, say, for vendor contracts, partnership agreements potentially. Right now, what risks have you seen within AI on that contract generation front?
Um, I mean, just mainly that not everything's in there or that there's too much in there. I mean, a lot of times it's overkill. You tell AI, I want a partnership agreement, and it's going to spell out a 50, 60-page agreement, which is more than you need. If it's just you and
Mm.
your partner and you've been law school buddies and you've been doing this together for a decade and you say, wait a second, we just need an agreement now because we never had one in place. I use AI, but it's to generate a cell phone contract for my daughter. So the stakes are a little bit lower. But
I like that.
well, for that, AI seemed appropriate, and whether or not it's going to be legally enforceable against her when she violates her cell phone contract is a whole different discussion. But the AI contracts, I think you can tell because the language is a little bit off. So
Mm.
going back to what law school teaches us, it's trying to teach us to go in this little box and we talk a certain way, and you can't be conversational. You have to have fancy big words. We're going to throw in some Latin in there to make it seem really fancy, and you can just tell that a contract written by AI is just a little bit off. And somewhere where a lawyer could help you or a human being can help you, is we make it a little more readable and a little more understandable. Because if the average person can read and sign the contract, it's still a contract. It doesn't mean it's
Mhm.
unenforceable because we didn't use 10 different Latin terms that nobody's, shown up in a course book since 2001 or 1910 or 1800s. I mean, we can stick in all the fancy Latin words you want, or we can just say, I'm signing this contract. Here's what you're going to do.
That's fair. I think that some people have a tough time seeing a plain language contract. We're so used to the terms and conditions on an app or on
Mm-hmm.
the iTunes store that if you see a contract that is less than, 17 pages, it's like, well, there must be something wrong with this. And it's just a natural assumption that people want to make. Now, when we talked last, Andrew, we talked a little bit about some of the video marketing that you've done. So I'd be interested knowing that you've still managed to see growth in your YouTube channel. And I've heard a lot of attorneys really start thinking about Should I have a more formal YouTube strategy, not just it being a dumping ground for videos? I'd love to visit that space of your YouTube channel. And from the perspective of if someone's thinking about YouTube, should I be using it for my law firm? What advice would you give that individual?
The answer is yes. You shouldn't even finish that question before you say yes. I mean, should I be? Yes. So you should be using it. Um, and the reason is, with all due respect to other folks who are out there, go just look in your market and go on YouTube and look at the videos. And not a lot of them are very well done. They're pretty boring. And if you want to make videos, I mean, you can go look at my channel, look at my first one. It's terrible. A whole set of them that you made me shoot back in a few years ago. The first videos are terrible, but they get better over time. And if you're in a business to consumer practice, I think you absolutely need a YouTube channel, because you're going to find it's probably the most return on investment of any marketing you're going to do right now, because people are on their phones. YouTube is probably as big a search engine, if not bigger than Google. I know they're owned by the same people, but go to Google and type in your next question and see what shows up first. And the first few buttons that show up, those are all videos on YouTube. How to do this. This morning we had to figure out how to find the model number on the dryer, because we need a dryer repairman to come over. And so I just typed it in, and there's a video that says, here it is. Here's how you do it. Open the door, look up there, and you'll see the model number. And it gives you the opportunity to talk to your prospective clients, just talking to them, and they get a feel for you and your personality. You don't have to be like you're presenting to a jury. I mean, maybe you do if you're a trial attorney and you want to go after the highest of the high clients, and they expect to see you. But in that case, you're probably not filming a video for YouTube. You're probably finding a way to film yourself closing at a trial that you did well in front of the jury in the courtroom. That's that video you want. But if you're in a business to consumer space, talk to your clients. It doesn't have to be formal. It doesn't have to have lots of graphics or anything. It can just be like you and I are doing right now, talking about an issue that comes up a lot this week or last week. I mean, I started a few years ago doing a Friday 5, which is just 5 questions from the week. It's totally lo-fi. It's just, here's 5 questions that I talked about this week with clients, and maybe you've had that question too. And so just start and try it and see what happens. There's no downside. I mean, unless you go out there, I guess, and shoot a video that says, call me up and I guarantee that I'll win your case. Maybe that's the downside. But assuming you don't say anything terribly unethical, there's no downside. And there's no guardrails yet from the Bar Association saying we can't use video. And I don't think there will be, because we're allowed to speak to our consumers however we like. I mean, I've worked with folks in the financial industry, and the challenge has been when we interview them, they can't talk about certain things because of all of their regulations. And I think lawyers have the same situation to a point, that we can't be unethical in our videos, but we can still talk to people about what's on their mind. I mean, it's not you bragging about anything. It's, you've been arrested. You're not sure what to do next. You've got a court date in a week. Do you call an attorney? Do you show up? Is it by Zoom? These are things that are on their minds. And if you can give them a short video to answer, and the video doesn't have to be 50 minutes long. It can be 5 minutes. It can be 3 minutes. It can be 8. I mean, mine usually end up somewhere between 5 to 8 minutes. And it's just sitting where I'm sitting right now, talking about an issue for about 5 to 8 minutes.
Yeah. So to that end, if someone here's like, oh, you know what? I don't, I hear Andrew saying, oh, my first videos were kind of not the best, and they'd like to skip ahead a little bit and do it a little bit more right at the beginning. Aside from, going and shooting it, don't worry about the length. You also mentioned, like, here's that framework, that Friday 5 type of framework, etc. What would you do to either help them be more confident on video or produce better videos early on?
If you want to be more confident, have somebody sit behind the camera and talk to them. So have a face behind that camera while you're talking, and just imagine the conversation. Just tell them, don't say a word. If they even want to open their mouth and pretend like they're responding, that's fine. But having a person behind the camera changes it, because then it just feels like you're having a discussion. And in some cases, I've tried it where the camera's a little bit off to the side, so it is just a straight on discussion, and you can't even see the camera. And just have that discussion and talk naturally. And I think that'll get you miles beyond where you think it will. Have a decent setup. You can do it on your phone. I mean, my first videos were on my phone with a tripod, so don't be intimidated by the technology piece of it. There's a lot of basic software out there where you can fix the levels. So there's like an app called Sound Equalizer that'll get it up to the right level, so it's not too quiet or too loud. There's, apps to transcribe what you said so that you can have the transcript underneath your video. So it's a lot of little things that add up to quickly make your video look a lot more impressive than it is, at least in your mind. And you can always hop over to Fiverr and have someone design a thumbnail for you. Literally costs you about $5. I think there's a lot of options. And the biggest barrier that I run into with people is that getting started piece, and they're just too nervous. And again, I was there too. You had hounded me for months to get started until I finally just forced myself to do it. And here we are 2.5 years later.
And I hope people heard that last phrase there, right? And here we are 2.5 years later, right? It takes some time before you see this, like especially a YouTube strategy, really start to take off and take on a life of its own, as opposed to feeling a little bit like you're talking into the void. But, I know that you also repurpose your YouTube videos in some other areas. Like they're not just videos on YouTube. So what are some of the ways that the YouTube channel gets integrated in the rest of your marketing?
Sure. And also, one last thing, if you want a bunch of views, do some newsjacking. I got like 80,000 views. I talked about Lisa Marie Presley's death. I've talked about Rick Ocasek. If you find a celebrity news story in your niche or whatever you're working in, do a couple of videos on that and you'll get the stats. What will happen is you'll get a bunch of views on your channel and then it'll make your channel look more impressive. So is it the long-term strategy? It doesn't necessarily get you a ton of clients, but it'll get you those extra numbers that you're probably looking for.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good balance to strike right there, is doing stuff that is for algorithmic performance versus stuff that is designed to drive clients. And as you kind of alluded to, those are not always one and the same, unfortunately, which is why so much of marketing is about yes and, not an or a but. It's yes and, the old improv rule. All right, Andrew. Yeah.
And you don't have to, and so you don't have to do the same video over and over again either. You can do a little newsjacking, you can do some FAQs, you can do some topics from your legal world. And you'd ask me about repurposing. I think, the main way I try to do it is take that video and push it across to LinkedIn. We push it across to Facebook. It's on my website. We link through the Google My Business profile. That just give people different ways to get to your channel and see your videos. Because, at the end of that video, it's going to recommend another video and another video. And these people get on a loop. I had a truck driver call me once because he went in on my business videos and he said he watched for about an hour and a half. And I didn't even know I had an hour and a half's worth of videos. And then I was concerned. I said, are you driving your truck while you're watching my videos? Because I don't need you to crash and the police, pull up and find this cab that has my videos playing on his dashboard. What was this guy doing? He said, no, I was listening like a podcast. So you have to think about that piece too, is that not everyone's going to actually watch the video. Some people are going to be there just for the audio, and they'll treat it like a podcast, almost like a video podcast, and they're really listening while they're doing something else. So when you're worried about what color shirt you're wearing, or if your tie looks good today, or if you've got to get your hair cut, they're probably just listening to what you're talking about. They're not necessarily as worried about what your visuals look like.
That is an important note. And it also lends credence to the idea of good sound goes a long way, and your lighting doesn't need to be spectacular. It just needs to be lighting. A lot of people, I remember, Andrew, early on in shooting a bunch of video, I prefer a very warm light, a very orange colored light in my day-to-day life. And to me, that orange light seems to me to be like the equivalent of daylight, because warmth, I just associate with warmth, right? Turns out daylight is a very white light. And that's actually the type of light that you want to shoot under. Don't do what I did and essentially make yourself look like Chester the Cheetah, the Cheetos mascot, by shooting under orange light.
I've gone so far down the rabbit hole when it comes to lighting. And I've got these up here now in the different colors, and you've got the thing I do, the glasses, you look up, you can see the reflection, and it can be frustrating, but nobody notices. Nobody's ever commented on my video being like, oh, look at the light reflecting in that guy's glasses. So but that's, that's the tough thing about video, is that people over obsess on those little things. And the fact is you think that someone's going to be annoyed that you have the light shining in your glasses. And frankly, 9 out of 10 people won't even notice it's there.
They do not care. All right, Andrew, before I ask you the last question of the show, if people want to connect with you, or if they want to see the videos that you've done for YouTube, where should we send them?
Sure. YouTube is, you can go to youtube.com and search for me, or you can go to Ayers, Ayers, lawtv.com, and that'll automatically forward you to the YouTube channel. The best way to connect with me these days is LinkedIn. It's just linkedin.com/in/AyersLaw. It's actually Ayers Law across most social media. I do have a TikTok, but I don't use it, so you won't find anything over there yet. And so I would look, you connect on LinkedIn is probably the best place, and I'd be happy to connect. And if you have questions about something you see in the video, I'm always happy to chat. We can chat on LinkedIn. We can set up a phone call. As I was saying before, when we were talking about what AI does to the industry, there's plenty of clients out there, and I don't believe that you have to knock down your competitors. There's, as I said, there's a bunch of other estate planning lawyers in this building. We chat. We've been commiserating about some of the problems we all seem to have in the estate planning world. And all of us are going home happy at the end of the day. So I'm not here to tell you shouldn't do YouTube so I can be the monolith on YouTube. I'm more than happy to talk about it and give you tips and tricks and what's worked for me and what hasn't.
That's awesome. All right. You will actually be, you were the second person to answer the first question of the show. You will be the first person to have this question asked the second time, because Jan, who was my first repeat guest, was on the show before I started asking this at the end of every show. So you're the first person to get asked this a second time. So what are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
Okay. Well, before I talk to you anytime, I listen to Mr. Charlie by the Grateful Dead, because it tells me Mr. Charlie told me so. I'm also listening to Vampire Weekend did an amazing cover of Peggy O, a Grateful Dead song, down at on Sirius XM. So if you go to YouTube and type in Vampire Weekend Peggy O, it's an amazing cover of a Grateful Dead song I love. And then it may shock you, but I'm a huge Jane's Addiction fan. So I've actually was listening to Jane's Addiction over the weekend because the weather was nice. We could, put the windows down and crank up some Jane's Addiction. What I've been reading, I'm reading Amor Towell's A Table for Two at home. And then here at the office, I'm reading The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. It's about cell phones and screens and what it's doing to our poor children these days. And with 3 at home, it's fascinating. They can really break it up by what it does to little girls and little boys. And even at the ages they are, I can already see that manifesting in my kids. And then what I'm watching is A Gentleman in Moscow. It's on Paramount Plus. A Gentleman in Moscow is one of my favorite books of all time. So if you have not read it, I read it years ago. It's an amazing book. It's beautifully written. And Ewan McGregor plays the Count for the Paramount Plus show. They're dropping an episode a week, and I think they're 3 episodes in. So if you haven't checked it out, I would read the book first. I will say the show is a little different than what I had in my mind when I read the book. But either one, definitely go for it. It's wonderfully written, and it's a great story.
Fantastic. I'm a big fan of Ewan McGregor. I have not read A Gentleman in Moscow, so I'm glad that you mentioned that, because I was thinking about diving into the show, but if I can prioritize the book, I will prioritize the book. I'm reading 3 Body Problem before I watch the Netflix show right now, so appreciate that recommendation. All right, Andrew, it has, as always, been a delight to talk with you about the future of law, what's going on with video marketing for yourself, authenticity, identity, complex problems in a world that is, I'm sure well articulated in that book, The Anxious Generation, which I actually have on order right now. I'm excited to read that one. So thank you so much for that insight, wisdom, answering the questions, sharing all your tips and tricks, as always, my friend.
All right, thank you, Charlie.
We'll see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.